I'm Bridget Rosewell. I'm a Commissioner with the National Infrastructure Commission, and I am chairing this webinar from the British Property Federation, which we've entitled Getting the Right Shed Space, and the challenge for us all in the managing logistics. It's a particular interest of mine because I was one of the lead commissioners on the National Infrastructure Commission's study of the freight sector. And one of our main conclusions is that this was an incredibly efficient sector operating within the constraints that it had to operate in, which had become pretty invisible in policy terms. And of course, some of that has become more visible during lockdown and the coronavirus. So maybe freight and logistics is less invisible than it used to be, but there are still, obviously, that raises the number of challenges, but possibly also increases them. So we've got three panelists here today, and the first one is going to be Kevin Moffat, who's Head of Logistics and Industrial Research for Savills. He runs a team that collects, collates and analyses the market-leading data on warehouse property market, and it's used to inform both the markets and his clients for investment decisions. So, where are we going to put all this stuff? And then that will be responded to by Neil Impiazzi, who is Partnership Development Director at SEGRO, at a public affairs stakeholder engagement, and across the whole of the UK's property portfolio for SEGRO. And also Kate Lawrence, who is a partner at John Lewis Partnership and real estate manager there, non-trading specialist, therefore concentrating on all aspects of distribution and the office portfolio management. So I think that this is a very important topic, and it's not going away. It's got huge implications for net zero and carbon management, as well as how we get our stuff every day, and indeed beyond every day, every week, every month. And you are obviously all welcome to 127 of you, 28 people still coming in, 128 of you so far on this webinar. Please do ask questions and comments through the Zoom. Q&A is probably the easiest way of doing that. In fact, Q&A rather than chat, please. And we will be trying to answer as many of those as we possibly can after the presentation and some responses from our other panelists. So at this moment, therefore, I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who is going to present some of the analysis that he's been doing. And he is about to share his screen, and here is his presentation. So over to you, Kevin.
Brilliant. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Bridget. Hopefully the screen has shared and you can see some slides. The BPF have just asked me to present 5 or 6 slides just on what's going on in the actual market, just a bit of a scene setter really, that will inform the rest of our discussion. So I want to keep this just very quick and just give you a very high level overview of what's happened since lockdown really. So I'll rattle through this, and I just wanted to share some very interesting data on online sales, because that has been one of the key drivers in terms of what's gone on with the market. This is a data set that we buy in from a company called IMRG. They're a trade body for online retailers in the UK. Really interesting data set. And what you can see really that since the end of March, online sales have been growing by about 30% a week. Now what that's doing is that's comparing 1 week in 2020 with the corresponding week in 2019. So, on average, 30% growth. And what's even more astonishing about this data set, Amazon don't contribute to it, and neither do the grocers. So this is everything else. Let's assume that Amazon and the grocers are doing really well. So this is the rest of the market. And what's really interesting is you can see some really interesting trends in this data. Home and garden doing really well. Beers, wines and spirits doing really well, and other parts not doing so well as you'd expect. But overall, this is frankly astonishing. And if we look at the Prologis research, which is in many cases an industry standard now, but that links to the amount of warehouse space needed as online sales grow. And rather crudely, but it's still it's still a good multiplier. For every extra billion spent online, we need 770,000 square feet of warehouse space. I did some very simple calculations, and if this growth rate continues for the next 12 months, that's almost 15 million square feet of extra warehouse space that we would need in the UK. A lot of ifs and buts in there, but you see where the direction of travel is going. So let's just look at a quick stat on take up. I'm pleased to report that actually the first half of 2020, we saw the highest amount of warehouse space transacted ever. 22.4 million square feet. You can read that there. 66% above the long-term average, 38% above where we were last year. This is astonishing. It's a huge amount of warehouse space taken in a very short amount of time. Scratch the surface of that data. 36% of that was Amazon. That is worth pointing out. 58% was actually bespoke buildings, build to suit buildings. And very interestingly, only 11% was short term. If you cast your mind back to the start of lockdown, a lot of people were saying, we're going to be deluged with short term requirements. Yes, that has happened, but it's by no means driving the market. It's much more structural, long term, considered space that people are taking. Now you'll notice at the top I put take up is strong for now, ... Well, if we just go on to the next slide, this just shows the level of requirements. So we log every single requirement in the market, and you can see, I just want to draw your attention to the red line really. You can see March and April were much slower for requirements, as you'd expect. Everyone was getting their head around what was going on. Requirements have picked up into May and June, but all things being equal, I would expect Q3, Q4 to be slightly slower because requirements were much lower in Q2. So who's been taking that space? I mentioned that Amazon have been dominant. Interestingly enough, just look at what was going on in 2019, the red line. The 2019 was dominated by 3PLs. They're companies like Eddie Stobart, DHL, Wincanton. What was going on there? Brexit, probably, stockpiling, all of those issues. And now look what's happened in 2020. It's a very different picture to where we were in 2019. The supply position. Now, this, in my opinion, is very interesting because as things stand, supply has risen very, very slightly from the start of the year, not by much at all. Actually, as well, we have seen a very, very slight increase in the amount of existing buildings taken in the lockdown period. So if we now look at how much space is under construction, actually, there was a huge decline in development announcements in Q2. So Q1, we had over 4 million square feet of new announcements made. Q2, less than 1 million square feet. There's now 6 million square feet coming out of the ground speculatively. Now, I think the supply position is going to get worse before it gets better. So actually, we're going to see vacancy rates come in. We're going to see the availability of modern grade A warehouses fall. When vacancy falls, typically speaking, rents rise. And when there's a lot of pressure on costs, when there's a lot of pressure on margins, what does that mean for the actual health of the tenant of this warehouse space? So there's a lot of dynamics there, to be aware of. But all things being equal, I'm expecting supply and vacancy to fall into 2021. Potentially, we will see second-hand supply increase as we see tenant failure and so on. So lots to go at there. I just thought that would set the scene very quickly, and I'll now stop sharing my screen and I'll hand back over to Bridget. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin. And that was a great overview of where we are at the moment. And then clearly what we now need to look at is where we might be going and what the pressures are. I'm going to turn first to Kate to talk about it from the occupier perspective and how it feels out there. Kate.
Hi everyone. Kevin's last comments on market dynamics and occupier pressures, I think, are really, really key. You know, with market improving and the threat of further rental growth in the shed sector, it's something that's quite concerning as a tenant, just to see our warehouse rent bills continue to grow. And it's something we're trying to work quite carefully with our landlords to actually get best way forward for us on that. John Lewis is sort of, we've all heard lots over the past 10 years about the balance of clicks and bricks and sorry, my computer screen has just locked itself with my notes on. So yeah, much has been made over the past 10 years on the importance of multi-channel retailing, omni-channel retailing, and those shifts from bricks to clicks. We've always believed that a balance between the channels is needed, and that there was a complementary place for online and store retail. And we've worked hard to improve the connectivity between our stores and the sheds, and utilising our wide store portfolio as part of that network, with click and collect, and even broadening that out to a wider network of retailers. As Kevin said, you know, online retail has grown, and John Lewis's online sales proportion has grown steadily to account for 40% of our total sales. And our warehouse portfolio has had to evolve to take that into account, making it easier, faster, and more efficient to get our orders to customers. And our estate now comprises circa 5 million square feet. Almost overnight, with the effect of COVID, 100% of our sales have had to go through our online platform and our warehouse buildings, just due to the closure of the stores. But because of the investment we've made in the estate, and particularly the level of automation at our campus at Magna Park, we've been able to maintain sort of 85% of our sales through our online platform. Operationally, though, this has had quite a big impact. We've had to add further costs into the supply chain to respond to the significant channel switch. And we've been lucky that Magna Park is highly automated, and we've been able to utilise the capacity in the system. Normally, the capacity is there to deal with the major peaks, so Black Friday, Christmas, clearance. But to give you an idea of the level of orders that are going through the network at the moment, we're only 14% down on the volumes on last year's Black Friday. And that's been consistent over the last 4 months. So it's quite, you know, there's a lot of stuff still going through the system. We've also seen a shift from click and collect orders, which are delivered to branch the next day and are made available from customers, to delivery direct from home. And this gives us a bit more time to respond and process the orders. We've also had to change our delivery proposition. So you're all probably familiar with the green van fleet, where man in a van turns up and delivers your product, brings it into your home, fits it, installs it, takes all the packaging away. Well, we can't do that. That 2-man fleet has become a 1-man fleet, delivery to doorstop and no fitting services. Those are all evolving and coming back in as the restrictions have had to ease. And then we've had to maintain and manage our customers' expectations. One of the big things about online retail is that it's instant, you expect things. And with John Lewis, people tend to expect the level of customer service that they see when they come into store. And maintaining that with a delivery and online order point is quite a difficult thing and a challenging thing that we're working through. We've also had to manage our stock and its locations. Our warehouses were reverse stocked from our stores for a change, with all this to release all of that store that's kept in these shut shops back into the network, so we can actually improve our website availability. And along with other retailers, it's been difficult to maintain the inbound flow and availability of product, just given the wide implications of shipping, manufacturing issues, all of those sorts of things. And then we've had to deal with the matter of returns, which, you know, most people will be aware are costly, timely, and, you know, it takes a lot of time to get the product back into the network and onto the website. And with our 32 shops that are due to open by the 16th of July, including the flagship store at Oxford Street, there's a significant undertaking ongoing to put a lot of the stock that's been pulled out of stock, back into the warehouse, back into the store again. So that's another challenge we've had to face. And Waitrose has had a different dynamic going on with it, as it's responded to the challenge of and concentrated on its commitment to feed the nation. The behaviour of food customers has also changed, given the need to isolate and adhere to movement restrictions. Our online food orders have expanded by more than 100% since the start of lockdown and are currently more than 150,000 per week. And whilst a significant proportion has been able to be done through our store network and collections, we've still had to get the stock through the network into stores and onto shelves to fulfill both online orders and store shopping. The rebalancing of the online retail store relationship following the reopening of stores and the recovery of the output of COVID is going to take some time to settle down, particularly as the public adjusts to life. If we continue to maintain significant volumes online in a more consistent manner, it does raise the question of whether we invest more in automation, which will enable us to cope with the volumes that are going through that online network. Particularly as they're slightly less space intensive than a manual operation. It's our view that COVID has shone a spotlight on the importance of the logistics sector, and it's really going to be very interesting to see how it evolves as time goes on.
That's really interesting, Kate. Thank you so much for those insights, particularly around this sort of the retail versus the online offer, or sort of the online retail offer. And as people begin to go back to work, of course, their pattern, you know, they won't be at home as much, so maybe their patterns will change, or maybe they won't. And as you say, the evolution of that's going to be really interesting, and indeed the evolution of automation and the space requirements. So Neil, can I turn to you to think a little bit more about those long-term trends and whether they're likely to change, and where we sit with the land requirements and our ability to supply those? Neil, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. Well, I think it's been a great kind of introduction from Kevin and Kate, setting some of those kind of challenges and opportunities from an industry and occupier perspective. I mean, I think that the first thing we've got to be very clear about is, you know, how important logistics is. It's seen as an industry in its own right, but actually it underpins, you know, efficient operation of most, if not all, business sectors right across the UK. And it's really integral to the kind of UK economy. You know, it's supporting British manufacturers, retailers, the NHS, government departments. I mean, the list goes on. But also really essential to modern life. And that's whether it's restocking the shelves at supermarkets or making home deliveries to residents, as Kate mentioned. I think, you know, we've all experienced the importance of the logistics sector in one way through this awful COVID-19 pandemic, and really the importance of having a resilient and flexible supply chain. It would be fair to say that whilst the NHS and social care workers should rightly get the plaudits, you could argue that the logistics sector has been a kind of unsung hero, ensuring that we get kind of medical products, food, and essential household items delivered to supermarkets and communities right up and down the country. We shouldn't underestimate what a fantastic role this sector performed. So what has been the impact of COVID on the sector? What will the future hold? We heard from Kate how it's impacting their business. And we'd kind of echo that and echo what Kevin said. You know, e-commerce volumes in April, you know, we've seen they represented 31% of retail sales. That was 16% higher than the previous month. Online grocery sales doubled, but that's really because food retailers were, you know, helping to keep the country moving. But even at occupiers, and Morrison's are anticipating 60% expansion on online service, and HelloFresh announcing plans to increase their UK workforce by 50%. So I think we're all in agreement that it's transforming and accelerating the kind of e-commerce and e-revolution as things get delivered. Will it continue? I suppose this is a key question. I expect the answer is yes. Morgan Stanley undertook a poll across Europe, asking people whether they bought more non-grocery online items, and would that continue after COVID. In the UK, 46 of people surveyed responded yes. So I think what, you know, for people that didn't go online, have now using it, have found the benefits, the ease of accessing, you know, a huge market on your laptop. So we're going to see that demand, I suspect, increase. And as I say, Kate's comments kind of bear that out. I think we're seeing kind of innovation. You know, my local kind of farm shop is delivering online now, and they have no intention of stopping that after COVID. That's opened up a whole new market. So I think we're going to see more innovation with businesses. And then finally, I think reshoring. So, you know, bringing more goods and services closer and into kind of warehouses. I think that I suppose we all felt at one stage during COVID vulnerable, that we went to a supermarket and the shelves were bare, that we all felt, you know, this is the first time many of us felt vulnerable, were we going to eat or whatever. So I think, you know, many businesses will be re-examining their supply chains and looking at, hopefully, you know, maybe that will involve increasing the need for local inventory to be stored. So I think the signs are, you know, continue that growth, you know, and Kevin was talking about that. But I think more importantly, for me, it's around the sector can play a really critical role in the government's recovery plan, you know, both in terms of helping creating jobs, but also contributing to the country's productivity and, you know, a more sustainable economy. Now, the PM's speech, build, 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 you know, the resounding speech recently, it did include the need to build more fantastic homes, rightly so, on brownfield site. And I don't think that any of us would argue that that's not important. You know, the country needs 300,000 homes to be built a year. Many of those are affordable. But let's not forget that if we build 300,000 homes every year, that will create an even greater demand for industrial goods and services. And as a consequence, more industrial space. The BPF launched a What Warehouse Where report that was updated this year. And that identified that for every 300,000 net new homes delivered, it would create the need for 20 million square foot of industrial space. So there, you know, this is a really, really important issue. Now, I appreciate this doesn't necessarily take into account the impacts of warehouse technology, which Kate mentioned, productivity and efficient improvements within the sector. But it does challenge the notion that we can't build 3 million homes over the next 10 years and not have more warehouse space or a plan that meets the consumer and business needs of those new communities. So I'd say, kind of in conclusion, you know, the BPF recognises this. It's a key issue within their building a shared recovery roadmap, which was submitted to government. And there's a number of things that we'd really like to see. The first is a presumption in favour of logistics development, and that would be meeting a clear set of logistics criteria. But that's really around making sure the provision of the right space in the right locations to support kind of a national distribution centres, but right through to last mile delivery. And that could be something that could be introduced as an amendment in the NPPF. And we've seen that with a number of councils, in particular North West Leicestershire District Council, have already introduced a policy like that. And I know, Bridget, even in your NIC Better Delivery Freight report included, you know, better land use planning for freight. So the whole sector is calling for this. I just want to be really clear. This is not an argument of whether brownfield land is used for homes or warehouses, because actually the two are intrinsically linked. What we need to do is strike the right balance on land allocations. So what's really important is better cross-departmental working between the likes of, you know, MHCLG, DFT, the Treasury, BEIS, to better coordinate and align infrastructure investment and planning policy. And I'd also add in there the importance of bringing statutory, kind of really important infrastructure players in there, like Highways England and the Environment Agency, to come together, because they can play a really critical role in helping to accelerate the delivery of major logistics schemes, particularly those that have significant infrastructure costs, such as rail freight interchange. And I think what would be fantastic was, you know, get the government to recognise the value of the warehouse and logistics sector and incorporate it into their industrial strategy, you know, because as it underpins so many of the UK's key kind of high value sectors. So warehouses, in my final kind of shot, warehouses, logistics, you know, this is essential national infrastructure. in our view, and planning policy needs to recognise the role of that, and the role that the industry can play in the government's recovery plan. So if the Chancellor is looking for a sector that can provide the jobs and productivity gains he wants to see, then perhaps the warehouse and logistics sector won't be the unsung hero for much longer. Thank you.
That's a great note to end the presentations on, and I think you're right. Logistics has become visible finally, in the way that I think many of the people probably on this call, but also everybody speaking here, would like to see. I think that the getting those sites and that visibility of where things need to be is obviously very important. The freight report that we had particularly focused on some of the last mile issues and the balance between housing delivery and depot rather than warehouse delivery. So that last mile question. And I might ask the panelists in a moment to respond to that. I just want to sort of reflect for a moment though that I don't know, when I first started in doing local economic stuff, which must be 20, 25 years ago or something thereabouts, logistics was definitely, it wasn't just unsung, it was undesirable. B8, oh no, we don't want any B8, it doesn't create any jobs. So it's really interesting that what Neil finishing off just now by saying, this is an important sector and it's job creating. And I think so we've come circle at least on that, because I think that is now recognised. And indeed the supporting role that freight and logistics plays, I think that is also recognised. But I think I'd quite like you to comment, guys, if you would, on where you think the constraints are on the most important constraints on site availability, and where and how we might go about releasing those. There's a couple of questions indeed on whether the planning system is likely to work properly for that. So Kevin, can I turn to you first? What's your response to that? Are there the sites coming forward? And if not, what are we going to do about it?
So I think, I keep a database of every plot of land in the country that could accept a B8 or B2 development. And actually, there's about 10,000 acres nationally, that is in the system ready to go. So it's not to say that there isn't sites and they aren't coming forward. They are, but there's a key difference to what's going on now compared to what's gone on in the past. And if we look at some of the Gaisley buildings, Gaisley Magna Park, Lutterworth, and Gaisley Magna Park, Milton Keynes. If we look at the leasing velocity, i.e. how quickly do deals happen, and if we look at the average size of the buildings, two things have happened. Buildings are leasing quicker and they're much bigger. So what happens now is that you churn through the land a lot quicker than you used to. So the problem is that yes, sites are coming through the system, whether that's through the traditional methods of the planning system or via DCO, which is an attractive way to bring sites forward. But those sites are being churned through much quicker. So the issue then becomes, how do you bring more sites through so that you don't lose that the availability of sites? Because actually, you could see a position in maybe 5 or more years where actually instead of having 10,000 acres in the system, that's down to 5,000 acres in the system. And actually the 5,000 acres that are left are actually not in the right place, for a modern logistics operation. So that's the key thing, is to keep those sites coming through, because deals are happening quicker and the land is being churned through much quicker.
Does anybody else want to comment on site availability? Kate, is this a challenge for you?
It is. I mean, we're not hugely active in looking for new sites at the moment, but we're constantly sort of evaluating what our portfolio looks like and where our portfolio is situated, particularly when you're in the run up to lease events, expiries, renewals, etc. And we're juggling with quite a lot of of factors at that point. We're trying to work out where our customers live, where we need to get, where the deliveries need to go to, where our stores are sited. Where's the critical point that we can then maximise our drivers' routes to be able to efficiently deliver product, and keep a control on the costs that are associated with that. So that's delivery costs as well as the costs of the physical operation of the warehouse. So in some instances, you might find that you can spend less on the warehouse if it's in the right location, because you can get your driver routes correct. But you might have to spend more on, conversely, you might have to spend more on the warehouse to get it in a more urban location, but it covers has a more sort of a smaller area, but more people in it. So it's a really interesting conundrum to try and locate what's potentially your big site, so your national network, versus your sort of regional CDHs, so your customer delivery element of it. So it's a real big challenge in the moment, particularly with the costs, probably the cost of land going up and the rents going up as well.
Yeah, I think there's a question in here whether the strategic planning of freight should be done by the NIC, but I think that the way Kate has described the complexity of that, I'm not sure we have the skills to do that. In fact, I'm sure we don't. What we can do is continue to press for the visibility and the need for when people like John Lewis or whoever come forward with proposals, that there's a way of those being accepted. And there are a couple of comments on the Q&A about how do we prevent these still being seen as somebody said dirty jobs. So do you think they still are, Neil?
No, not at all. And when COVID is over, we'd invite anyone to come along and meet, visit some of our industrial sector, meet our customers. I think the term, I think if we were terming industrial, there's always you get two ends of the spectrum. At one end we have R&D companies that are developing the next generation of drugs for cancer treatments. That's considered an industrial kind of use. And at the other, you could have a car breakers. So I think at times the use class of an industrial it just encompasses everything. So I wouldn't say that there aren't uses that aren't compatible for coastal residential and that kind of stuff. So I think certainly when we're looking at the kind of customers that we have across our portfolio, you are joining many world-class businesses with a fantastic career ahead of you, in an exciting, in a really exciting growing sector. And when we visit our customers, which we do regularly, and we meet a lot of the people that work in middle management, many of those have come through the shop floor. So they started as a delivery driver and end up, running the operation. So we've got to be careful when we talk about jobs, certainly, I think there's a fantastic opportunity for a lot of people, particularly young people, that want to go into a fantastic, exciting, growing career that's, logistics. But it's not to say that industrial thing doesn't capture some of those other uses, which, as I say, you probably wouldn't want to be living next to.
Well, that's certainly true. And I think, Kate, the way Kate set it out, the amount of technology and modelling and data science that you get in logistics and freight operations, that's something that needs to be probably put over more strongly by the industry. This isn't about just people in overalls, as it were. It's much more diverse than that, and maybe there's a kind of the BPF or the logistics sector, or you should be thinking about how to make that very obvious, and we tried to do that in the freight report as well. However, I'd like to move on a little bit into some of the sort of onshoring and investor stuff. So I've got a question here about the interests of overseas investors and how their investments might be focused. But there's also, I think, a broader question about the overseas element. And I think somebody, I think it was you, Neil, mentioned onshoring and increase in the resilience of the system that might be associated with that. And I think it might be worthwhile having a little further talk about that. So Neil, would you like to kick us off around onshoring and overseas investment?
Yeah, well, I think on the onshoring, I think we are an island. We rely heavily on our ports and Channel Tunnel and Heathrow Airport, which is going through a difficult time, but the airport ships 40% of the UK's exports in value, and I think what we're seeing is just businesses are just re-examining whether those traditional ways of sourcing supplies, we operate in a global market, is right, given what the impact of COVID had on their businesses, and not just their businesses, but on their customers, the ability not to serve and be able to meet the needs of their customers, and that could be residents, but also other businesses. So I think we're seeing that businesses will just re-examine that, and I think the potential is that that could create more demand for warehouse space if they want to store more kind of goods. But it also may mean that we see an increase in manufacturing or other businesses popping up that could form part of that supply chain, and where resilience is as important as quality and cost. So I think that's something that we'll see over the coming kind of months and years.
I think
I'll just sorry, yes, just Kevin.
Interject just quickly. I mean, we shameless promotion, but we put a paper out on nearshoring and global manufacturing supply chains and so on, and our view on this is it is clear that all of the mood music at the moment is about moving from a just-in-time supply chain to a just-in-case supply chain. And I think, how does that play out in reality? Because if we, as Neil rightly says, we are an island, we're reliant on our ports, airports, and the Channel tunnels. But, UK labour is expensive, UK land is expensive. And we actually see this in more of a continental impact. So potentially people, manufacturers sourcing components from Asia. Well, actually in the future what they may look to do is source components from Eastern Europe or North Africa, or so we think it'll be much more of a continental impact rather than a UK specific impact. But probably what will happen in a UK context is that we will look at where stuff comes into the UK, and Brexit had brought that to the top of the agenda anyway. I think the realization of the bottleneck around Dover-Calais, and actually potentially what we'll see is more stuff coming in via the East Coast ports, more stuff coming in via other freight airports in the UK. So it'll be about just spreading the load, minimizing that risk, and therefore what does that mean for markets along the M62 corridor, for example, in the north, or maybe the A14 and M6 corridor in the Midlands and the Eastern region. So I think it's about just a rebalancing of the load of where stuff comes into the UK and the property impact thereof.
Don't forget that Tilbury is shortly to come on stream with its expansion of container delivery, and Tilbury will be able to deliver roughly half, I think it is, of what Dover can do. So it will actually make a huge difference to that capacity down in the south, but with consequences obviously for how it gets moved on again. So I think you're right that there's a lot going on in that kind of space, and we'll have to see how all of that works out, and with the air freight aspects to that as well. So, but Kate, sort of onshoring and changing the resilience, if you like, of your inventory systems. Is that something you're actively working on?
It may be, but I think one of the things that sort of came to us was that we may just have to focus on a bit more of a consolidated product offer. If you walk into Waitrose at the moment, you could buy, I don't know, one of 100 types of mustard, for example. Or if you go into John Lewis, your choice of socks is is huge at the moment. And it may just be that in order to improve the resilience of the lines that we do stock, of the lines that are available to purchase, and we'll focus on reducing that to make sure that the availability of those is more consistent. So, you know, we'll stock 10 mustards and 15 different pairs of socks, just to tackle that issue. And it's certainly something that seems to be working its way through the supermarkets at the moment as well.
So is that something that you think will change the pattern, guys, of where, for retailers in general, of where things are stocked and stored? There's a particular question here about the use classes, which we referenced a little while ago, and I rather agree. I think that the distinctions between the current B1s and B2s and blah de blah are just completely irrelevant these days. I'm not even sure that it helps to have any distinction between B classes, or sometimes B classes and A classes for that matter, and it rather gets in the way of the planning system, but possibly also some of the locational issues, and particularly around ports. I mean, are we going to see a requirement for getting warehouses back into ports, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We're already seeing it. You know, you look at, we do a lot of work with London Gateway, down you know, to the east of London, and you know that is doing fantastically well. You know, they've signed some interesting occupiers to go there. You know, and we're seeing the same up and down the East Coast. You know, we work with some other port operators as well. I mean, going back to the original question on the use class order, and it's, you know, it's fit for purpose. You know, I don't disagree. You know, it can create, you know, arbitrary numbers, you know, within a local authority. And I think one of the other questions that has come in is about, you know, the fact that we don't have a regional planning system. You know, and you know, the issue around logistics, you know, is that, you know, in some cases, logistics buildings are pieces of national infrastructure. In other cases, you know, the area it serves is a whole region, maybe 2 or 3 regions, and so, you know, there's a whole load of things that don't marry up, you know. And you know, to give you a case study, I was working on a project for a client, you know, looking at a B8 development, and the local authority said, well, you know, we've got, I'm going to make the numbers, you know, not make the numbers up here, but I'm just going to, you know, use approximations. But let's say, you know, the local authority said, well, we've got 10 acres of land for B8, and therefore we have enough. And I said, yeah, but they're 20 parcels of half an acre. And you know, they're by the canal. You know, that doesn't make sense. You know, actually we'd rather have 2 parcels of 5 acres that meet the needs of the modern supply chain. And so you get this, you know, number crunching almost, and saying, well, we've got enough B8. You know, the Employment Land Review says so, but it's, you know, that's not the right B8, and it's not in the right place, and it's not contiguous. So, you know, it's, you know, one of my colleagues, she thinks actually we should have a use class called urban services. And, you know, it's it's all of the land and real estate that supports the urban environment. Now, you know, that's great. That was great pre-COVID, but if we're all going to move out of the urban environment, you know, that's speculation, of course. You know, what does it mean if we're all living in a rural area? But you know, that's another thing altogether.
Bridget, I think
our ability to do that. But anyway, Neil, yes.
Yeah, just picking up on some of Kevin's comments. I mean, I think, you know, we're having some intelligent conversation with the Port of Tilbury. Again, just thinking about the whole supply chain. You know, we think about goods that come into the country. They're likely to go into 1, 2, 3 warehouses, maybe even 4. You know, in terms of their journey all the way to the end user. And I think, you know, just trying to be a bit more smarter. If goods come into the country via Port of Tilbury, how do we then move them into the city? You know, can we use the Thames, you know, more efficiently than we're using? So I think we're just trying to have some of those conversations about how we move those products, meet the needs of the customers, but actually get it to the end user in the most efficient, sustainable and effective way. And on the use class, yeah, I mean, I think we do a lot of work in London, a huge amount of work in London. So creating kind of urban industrial estates does create challenges of you know, they're close to residential areas. We've just secured, you know, built a scheme, or we just got planning consent for a scheme in Tottenham, which was cheap by jowl next to a residential area. Now, I think what the industry has to do is just come forward with, you know, fantastic design, you know, really drive those kind of design credentials and fantastic kind of community engagement to bring the community, you know, on board. But for us, the reason that's important is for our customers, whether it's John Lewis or others, is to service those needs locally, again, in a very sustainable way. So could it be electric vehicles? Can it be cargo bikes? Is it click and collect? So for us, you know, the location about being in the right location is at times it could be on the M1, the big national, but it could be being at the heart, if we can call it that, of a community. So we can deliver these kind of efficiency and sustainability kind of benefits to the community. So we're not having vans putting out diesel, it's actually all electric as such. So there's different, you know, but I think the use class is something that definitely needs to be looked at.
Okay, that's really interesting actually, because I've been trying to get some discussion around that. So that's a very useful thing for me to feed back into some of the other conversations that we've got. Just a comment from me on regional planning. It's not clear to me that ever did it particularly well, and my recollections of regional planning examinations in public and all of this, particularly around the East Midlands, would not give me great confidence that was actually going to be any better. So I think that we've still got to need to think about those integration of the levels between, if you like, the national, the regional, the local. And so I want to ask you guys, and pings off some of the questions that we've got here around devolution and how you feel about the way devolution works, and indeed coming back to the high street. And there was a question earlier on which I'd like to come back to around, do we need to worry about the high street, or is that not our business, as it were? Or are there things that the logistics sector can be doing and to think how we repurpose or reimagine the role of the high street? Does anybody like to comment on any of those? Is out of town going to still dominate?
I think a lot of this is going to come down to how safe the public feels. You know, we've opened, you know, we're about to open 32 of our stores by next week, and sort of the anecdotal sales patterns from those stores at the moment are a significant shift from where they were back at the start of March. You know, understandably, we're seeing that the bigger city stores have seen a drop off in sales because people just aren't around, whether that's tourists, whether that's people coming in and out of offices. And it's not just John Lewis, it's Waitrose as well. Those stores that rely on high volumes of people going in and out of a place. So it feels there's going to be a huge impact across the sector, and then probably a knock-on impact on the logistical side as to what happens if we don't maintain the high street, if we don't keep a retail element or a leisure element in these city centres and locations, as to what then happens next. If people feel safe, if people start to feel safer, I'm sure people will start to go back. But you know, we need to be, I suppose, able to respond to that in both the short term and the longer term.
Yeah, it's not easy, is it?
I mean, ultimately, you know, it's a political decision, isn't it? You know, it's public, it's government policy. You know, how to stimulate the high street, how to, you know, what is the impact of business rates, what is the impact of you know, online sales taxes, and you know, all of this type of stuff. You know, it's just on a personal level. You know, you can't get a haircut online yet. You know, there's lots of things that the high street is brilliant for, and there are lots of things that online is brilliant for. And if you look at, you know, the majority of what was bought online before COVID, it was replenishment stuff. You know, it was your, you know, that's what Amazon excels at. It's, you know, it's your shampoos, it's your toothpaste, it's the stuff that you just need to run a household, replenishment. Now that's going to go a step further in a couple of years' time, because your fridge, your dishwasher, your washing machine is going to be online, and it's going to replenish itself. And so this was happening anyway. So the role of the high street is key, actually, because it does serve as branding for the retailers. It does serve as a returns place for the retailers, and so on and so forth. So I do think the two things are linked. And if Amazon really does go into grocery in the UK and Europe, like it has done in the States, then it's going to be interesting as well. So I do think the two things are interlinked.
And to be honest, I'm not convinced it's just a political problem. The reason the high street started to struggle is because consumers chose to do different things. Now, it's true that out of town was because it's car-based. So maybe it's the car-based which gets substituted for by the online, but the high street, maybe a truncated high street, remains with that role, or maybe with the click and collect type role, and far more lockers and so on and so forth along the high street. But we're obviously focusing today on the logistics side of things. So it's those linkages, I think, that we might be most interested in. Neil, what's your response?
Yeah, no, I mean, Bridget, you picked up my point, actually, which is it's driven by consumer behaviour and kind of technology. We as consumers, at times there is the ease of ordering something online is driving that, and of course not just population growth, but we've got a next generation. My sons, they very rarely now go into Guildford, which is our local, but they will go to eat and go to the cinema. So I think there's something around how high streets kind of repurpose and think about that being more destination as well. I think on the industrial, certainly out of town, the big out of town retail centres that you see, you could see them being repurposed for industrial uses. It might be urban retail, but it could be for other uses as well, for local businesses as well. And some of those kind of values are starting to level out. So I think there's, we can't stop this kind of e-commerce revolution. I think there's something we should be almost embracing it. Sometimes we talk about the robotics and the automation as a bad thing. And I don't know another sector which talks about innovation, where they say it's really bad. I think is there a way we should be embracing this, developing the next generation of young people on software for logistics, designing the next generation of fixing the robots, rather than trying to say, actually, we don't want this to happen. I don't feel at times the sector is being embraced in a way that it should be, to provide some real value to the economy and job creation.
There's a question just come in here about the need for local hubs, which are accessible by the cargo bikes and electric bikes that Neil was talking about, and those within communities where people can walk and cycle to collect parcels. So why do people think high streets are important? Actually, mostly because they're the hub of a community, and you've got the library and all of those things as well. So is that the role of logistics in supporting the high street is maybe something that the industry needs to think about? What do you think?
Well, it goes back to that point I was making about urban services. It's the use of of real estate to support the urban environment. If I don't know what the answer would be. If you said you wanted to convert a shop into a warehouse, you want to convert a shop into B8, whereas actually what you actually want to do is convert something into a place where you can go about your business, collect what you've ordered, return what you don't want, all of this type of stuff. And it's a very different thing. Interestingly enough, the environmental and sustainability points around all of this, people are saying, well, online retail, you've got more vans on the road, but actually what's going on now is you've got more vans on the road that have a higher density of drops. So actually, by having one van on the road that's doing 200 stops instead of maybe 60 that it was doing before, actually you're taking 200 cars off the road that would have gone and all made individual shopping trips anyway. So actually we've created a situation where because there's so much density of drops now, it's potentially more efficient and more sustainable. The packaging is a different question than the emissions, but I think it's it's all part of the debate.
It would be interesting.
Yeah, sorry, Neil.
Bridget, it would be interesting to see. I mean, not necessarily a logistics issue, but the post-COVID world will look very different for people that work in offices. And how many of us will be working at home? Is that actually a good environment? Does the high street provide another opportunity to bring like-minded people together, entrepreneurs that are working there 2 days a week? So I think this whole, there's an opportunity to really reimagine how the high street operates, and I think in a more flexible, but it has to sort of be this real destination where people want to go to, but maybe there's an opportunity there for local people to be working in a day of work. So for myself, could I be going to my local high street, grabbing a coffee, doing other bits and pieces, having my hair cut, as Kevin's spoken about, but also being in an environment which supports what I'm doing rather than just being at home all the time. So I think there's some other opportunities for us to think about.
We're just about to run out of time, and we're opening up a whole new discussion which we might want to have a webinar about. But I think we now want to integrate the A classes and the B classes actually, so to bring the whole thing together, or maybe think about use classes all over again, but that would definitely be a different topic. So I'm just going to, in the last few minutes, can I ask each of you to just some final comments around this? Do we have the ways of do we have the right way to get the right shed space in the post-COVID environment? Just a couple of couple of sentences each from each of you, and I'll start with you, Kate.
I think so. I think businesses are evolving, and they are evolving quickly and having to adapt. And I think that adaptation process and what is required and how permanent that adaptation is going to be critical to what the logistics sector needs to provide for the short-term, medium and long-term future.
Okay, that's good. Neil?
I think we're getting there, but I think until we have those kind of government departments collaborating in the way that we'd like to see, we probably won't fulfill our potential as quickly as we could do.
Okay, and Kevin?
I think, I think I broadly agree with both of the comments. There are some very good people who work in the sector. There are some very innovative companies who work in the sector, and logistics will continue to work very efficiently in the background. But it only becomes public when something goes wrong. When stuff isn't on the shelves, or when KFC runs out of chicken, or whatever it might be. What this crisis has done is has made logistics become part of the the man on the street knows what's going on now, and that can only be a good thing in the long term. And really, when the man on the street speaks to his MP or his local councillor, that'll be when perceptions change. So let's take the positives out of what's happened, and it's shone a light on our sector that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for a very positive end to this, and the ways in which the logistics sector is responding to COVID, both in its existence and as we begin to come out of it with the sort of all the bumpiness that will also involve.